Welcome to the first episode of the Benmore Brief Podcast. I'm your host, Richard, co-founder here at Benmore Technologies. And on the call with me today is a close friend of mine since college, Arkash Jain, who's currently doing research at a Harvard lab focusing on, what do you say, computer vision for cell biology, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So in this call, we're going to go over kind of a little bit of Arkash's story. He's actually calling us from India right now. Remind you a little bit, an hour north of Mumbai, correct?
It's basically 250 miles west of Delhi. So it's
West
like
of Delhi.
way up
Okay.
north, way up north.
Got you. Okay. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about his story coming here to the U.S., why he wanted to come to the U.S., how and why he went to BU, and how he got into his current position doing research at Harvard, and then we'll talk a little bit about AI. You know, we have an expert on the call, right? Big AI research guy, right? So we'll be talking a little bit about what he thinks the future of AI is, what he's currently doing research on, and it'll be fun. So without further ado, Arkash, let's first talk about that decision to come to BU. Walk me through that process in your head.
Yeah. I mean, coming to the United States for me goes way back to, I guess, when I was a kid. Maybe I told you this. I've had a U.S. visa since I was 6 months old. So I've been coming in and out of the country since I was really, really young. Even though I was born and raised in India, I have a lot of family friends in the United States. So I always saw this country as, and I certainly believe, as the greatest country on the planet, not in just some patriotic sense, but also in terms of innovation. The greatest minds are here. You're competing with the best people. So I always kind of knew that I wanted to be that kind of person where I'm competing and working with the best minds available. I come from a very academic and very professional family. My mom's a doctor, dad's a lawyer, grandparents were highly educated, accountant and teacher. So I think it was kind of in the genes to be sort of like a builder, build things. So right after high school, I was really into engineering. And believe it or not, I applied to the top schools in India, got in, I took an exam, and I was one of 8,000 out of 1.5 million to get selected. Applied to and got into the best university in Singapore, some in England. And then, of course, in the United States, I got into a few schools here, including NYU, Dartmouth, and BU. At the time, I was really interested in mechanical engineering and bioprosthetics, so robotic arms and, legs for the disabled. And Boston was just the hub of biomedical engineering. So I flipped a coin and I was like, all right, this is where I want to be. And that's how I came to BU. But I never had a question in my mind that I did not want to come to America or BU in general. So yeah, that's how I came here.
Right. And then so we met at BU, right, in the Builds Club. How did you now I know, I kind of stumbled in there one day, but how did you get involved? Walk me through how you got involved into the Builds Club.
Yeah, it was an interesting environment. I think you and I started both during COVID. So my freshman year was really just messed up. First semester, we were locked indoors. And second semester, we had this weird hybrid thing with sort of Zoom classes, sort of, come in sometimes. It was really dead. But my roommate at the time, he was actually the reason why I kind of switched to computer science, leaning in that direction already, because turns out I really suck at using my hands to build things, even though I use them a lot when I'm talking. It's a problem. But I really enjoyed my first semester computer science class. So he's like, hey, I think CS is the future. It's a really democratized platform. You can build cool AI systems, websites, distributed systems, cybersecurity, anything that you want using just a computer. So why don't you look into this field? So I switched to computer science and math and was trying to explore what clubs or options I had. My roommate and a few of his friends, just a bunch of guys who were really, really stupid, but really, really smart at the same time. We were just kind of, I think, do you remember COVID, Richard? Like all this, everybody's wearing a mask. No one wants to talk to you.
Yeah, I didn't meet you guys at the time, but absolutely. Yeah, no, I remember COVID in the city at the time. Yeah, for sure.
Were you on campus during that time?
Yeah, I was on
I'll go
campus.
back into the story of Builds. This feeds into it though. So, where did you stay?
I was in Rich Hall.
Is that
there.
West Campus?
That was like the village. You know how they have the three buildings?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the three buildings.
Yeah, but I think you remember that freshman housing and freshman year was just really, really dead. So no one really
Yeah, it
wanted
was
to
tough.
talk to each other. I think it was also peak, like, I think people were just trying to be politically correct. No one really wanted to say anything wrong. And I'm not going to go into too much of the politics side, but it was really hard to meet people and make genuine connections. So one day when my roommate and one of his friends came into the room, we started shooting the shit. And I was like, wow, these guys are really honest. They're pretty smart. They're building this cool new student link, which was basically BU's way of managing your classes, payroll, etc.
Mm.
And it's basically built by someone who was living in the 50s. It's disgusting. It's just made out of pure PHP, in my opinion. So I was like, all right, let's start hanging out with these guys. And they discovered a room in an old building that no one usually went to. And it was just a dingy little basement. You had a couch, you had a couple tables, you had a couple monitors and power tools. If you know
Yeah.
anything about any college, not just BU, there's so much restriction on how you can use power tools for a good reason, because there's a lot of stupid people out there who might chop their hands off. But I just walked into the club and you just had a bunch of power tools, including a chainsaw or, like something to cut. I'm not a big builder, but you had all these power tools over there. And I asked them, I'm like, do you need some sort of training or something to use these? They're like, no, we just have a buddy system. So if you cut your finger, blame that guy. And, but jokes aside, that's basically Builds in a nutshell. So we just discovered into this, isolated room where you just had some students who were building things. That's hence the name Builds. So you had computer programmers, you had computer engineers. Someone had built this new sort of game to play with 5 people. It was kind of like a bastardized version of Among Us over there. So we had a lot of interesting things going on in Builds. And that's how we discovered the place. So the couch should not be put in a blue light, by the way. That is a disgusting, disgusting couch.
Yeah. No, and then when I remember I stumbled across it, this was after they built the CDS building. They moved, right, at a certain, I mean, they must have moved into that CDS, their new location. But I mean, to that point, it was I would call it one of the places on campus where you just had a whole bunch of people who would just go in there and just try to build things. That attracted a lot of computer developers. But I remember walking in there because, in college, I know we talked about this previously, but like in college, I was doing the contracting and building a product as well. And I felt in one way or another isolated just because there weren't that many people just in that I came across that were also either contracting or trying to build some sort of product. And I just remember walking into Builds and, everyone was doing a contract. I remember we talked about last time, there was someone in there who was currently working like a job and going through school and then paying off school with the job money. I remember there was someone in there working like 3 part-time jobs, and these are all like computer software jobs. Everyone in there was doing something. I mean, they gamified like so many things. They gamified the application process. I remember someone in there was gamifying like credit cards, trying to like reapply to like banks and stuff like that to get like better credit. So regardless, I mean, it was really this. Yeah,
that was Robinhood 2.0. I think it was peak meme stock time. Actually, I'm not even joking to you. Yeah,
it was just a great time. You just go in there and everyone was doing something, just building. I did I mean, it wasn't just computer science, like science majors. There was biomedical majors in there. I think we had a poli-sci major. Yeah, philosophy
justice
major in there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was just this room of like pure innovation, and it really connected with me personally, just because I could go in there and talk about the stuff that I was doing, and other people could sort of match that. And to that point, I know we talked about this previously as well. From that club, at least in our graduating year, has gone on now and is working at a larger company or is doing some sort of contracting or pursuing a PhD or something like that. But it was one of those places on campus where we were really far away from No one cared about titles, pretty blasé-faire with any sort of like university structure or anything like that. It was really just a place to build. I mean, it's in the name, right? So I met you there, and then I think we just kept on talking, right? Like we just kept on talking about what you were doing, what I was doing, and stuff like that. And we've stayed in contact ever since.
Yeah, and I was trying to build, throughout college, I was really into building companies. Ultimately, that would be, in 5, 10 years, my goal to make my own company. Right now I'm doing research and pursuing the path of PhD, work at one of the big AI labs, 5 to 10 years, and then maybe start a company. I think that's always been my goal, but yeah, I think that's how you and I connected. And yeah, it's a testament to builds in general and just the kind of personalities you attract when basically everyone in the room just didn't care about any sort of, conflicts. As you said, there were no titles, there was no politics, anything, there was no like fighting amongst each other. It was
No.
basically a space for you to come and build things. And believe it or not, it attracted some of the smartest minds in the university. We had people going to Amazon, Stripe, and Earl. Philip's doing a PhD. He's the guy who is doing a job paying off his student debt. Yeah, I think that club really helped shape me who I am as a developer during the last 2 or 3 years, because essentially it stems from Mark Zuckerberg's mindset of work fast and build things. So we just started our own projects. I remember I did an entire internship from builds one summer of 2023 working at a startup, and I was in the room when I got the call. I was in the room when I gave my interview. So it really comes full circle to the whole builder mindset. So
I
yeah.
remember that. Yeah, we had people taking company Zoom calls at a table where someone else is using a power tool to make something robotic, like 2 feet away from them, having like internal. It was just an awesome space. And the nice thing, you could just go in there and work, and the computer science classes were nearby. You stop on, you go to class, you come back an hour later, and you just continue, doing homework or whatever your personal project that you're working on. So yeah, I mean, it was an incredible space. I think anyone who's part of the club would say the same. It was a great place to meet people and build relationships as well. Okay, well, that being said, we're friends in college. We go on. Now let's talk about I know you had a job offer on the table, and you had this opportunity to pursue research. Walk me through the thought process there. You have a high-paying job versus research. What was the decision-making process between those two, where you ultimately ended up pursuing research?
Yeah, so, it's kind of funny. During college, I told my mom that I'd never do a PhD, and I thought research was boring. Because before I started out my career, let's say, in research, my freshman summer, I was doing research in chemical physics, building different types of solvents. So I think the team got a grant for about $500,000. I got like a scholarship for $6,000 to pursue this research. But after that, I really decided, hey, I really love industry. I became a venture capitalist, did 2 internships over there, worked at a hospital as a tech guy, worked at a startup being a programmer. So at the end of my senior year, I was building a company, and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. While I was building a company, I got 2 offers. One was from a big, I'm not going to name who they are, but a huge company, and they were giving me a 6-figure offer to join them. But it seemed kind of boring, the job. It was basically like a React developer. And I'm not shooting down React developers, but I really enjoy doing new things, and I get bored easily. So if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, I'm probably just not going to be as productive and bored and miserable. Uh, I had a choice to make. The research job that I got was at this lab, the Kieran lab at Harvard, and they were one of 2 labs on the planet that were doing or proposing to do the things that no one else was doing. They had really interesting projects where they worked at the intersection of computer science and cell biology. And I ultimately decided, hey, do I really want money, or do I want to do something cool? So I decided, hey, let's try this thing for a few months. If I don't like it, I can always go back to industry. But here I am 7 months later, and, props to my mom, because she said, never say never. So I'm applying to a PhD in 6 months. And yeah, that's just my thought process. I wanted to do cool things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's the age old decision for your motivated engineer, right? Do you pursue the money or do you pursue the most interesting problems in the world, right? And there's no right or wrong answer there, but I mean, there's a reason why the hard tech startups, very complex, sort of cutting edge research startups are able to really attract some of the brightest minds because at a certain point, money is money. But if you're pushing forward the field of anything, artificial intelligence or anything in computer science, I mean, it pretty much cascades across all industries at this point. I mean,
Wait, I can ask you the same thing, right? Do you remember that I think you were also working at a company and
mhm.
yeah, ultimately you decided, hey, I want to, you know, go full throttle on Benmore. And, I think the money will always follow, but it's similar to your story, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what it comes down to is you only have one life, frankly. I mean, you only have one life, and in that life, you only have your youth once. So, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Maybe this is a bit of a disconnected viewpoint, but we're young. Do we need to chase money in our youth? We have the rest of our life to chase money in our youth. It's better to try and take moonshots 110% of the time. That's my viewpoint on it. That's my opinion on it. It's better to try things out, try to build a company, try. And the skills that you'll build, by continually trying, this is interesting. I was talking to the CEO of a small publicly traded company. They're traded over the counter pink sheets, tens of millions of dollars market cap, not some $1 billion company or anything like that, but successful. And so I asked him, I go, he built a company up to when he was like, our age in mid early 20s. He built a company up to be doing about $10 million in revenue. And then something happened, a couple contracts didn't come through, and it went bankrupt. And so he spent like a decade of his life building this company up. And so I asked him, I just go, all right, so you went through that process. Did you have any regrets doing that? And he was like, look, Richard, I built that company up. It came flaming down. And for the first time in my life, I had to apply to jobs. And so he started putting out resumes, and he'd never applied for a job in the computer space before so he was applying to entry level jobs because he just didn't know kind of what his experience would match up to. And he said he'd get calls back from these companies, and they were offering him division head roles, branch head roles, senior leadership or dev leadership positions, because he built a company from the ground up to $10 million. That alone, the skill set that you gain doing that, you can get. I'm not saying you can't get that in any other, organization, but doing that so young and understanding what it takes to go to $10 million in revenue and then learning from the fact that it came crumbling down, those skills are transferable to leadership positions in the corporate world. So I heard that, and it was pretty clear to me. It's like, okay, well, if there's no loss in sort of a corporate career projected, you don't have to choose between the two. I mean, my goodness, well, might as well just take a moonshot, take a moonshot.
Yeah, I agree. I remember I was asking you for advice one time, and you were in Austria. Do you remember June 2024? This was
Yeah,
literally like, I think this was
a
a
couple months
week
ago.
before. Yeah, this was a week before I started my job, and I
Mhm.
was asking you for advice on how you keep going because I think I completely agree with you. And it also combines with because it seems very romanticized that, hey, I built this company and I sold it for
Mhm.
$5-6 million or doing 10 million in ARR. So you're living the life. But you and I both know how hard you work now and how like you were working way, way, way more when you were starting up Benmore. I remember 12, 13-hour days because you do your classes and then you do your contract work. And I think it also requires a certain personality or,
Mhm.
you have to be willing to put in 12, 13, 14 hours a day if you really want to build a company or you really want to be successful. It's a testament to being young where you have the energy, but you also need to
Yeah.
have the mindset that, hey, I'm not going to be distracted. I'm not going to have the mindset, C's get degrees. I really need to focus and be in one lane and spend the hours, spend the time building something. So, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree with you.
No, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to you can't work for 12 hours a day. You just can't do that. So if you are the type of person who, and I really do mean this, works for 12 hours a day, it can't be work to you. You need to be so head over heels passionate. And this is a beautiful thing about computer science is I really attribute it to being about 85% of the sort of mindset that you get into when you're playing video games. It's very similar in that sense. So for all of those hours that I work, and I would work in college, between school and the contracting and just trying to build things. I mean, you can 12 hours can go by quickly. I mean, there were days when I first got it. I mean, I spent, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I would spend all-nighters at that builds lab. I would just,
They didn't kick you out? Didn't kick you out?
Yeah. No one came to check on me. I was just sitting in the corner coding away, so no one came to check on me. But I forgot who I was talking to. They asked, it might have been a family member. They asked, don't you wish that you had more of a college experience? I mean, I really went into it, and a lot of other parts, I had to sacrifice a lot of other parts of my life. It wasn't as social as maybe I would have wanted to be, I wasn't really performing well in track either. But, looking back, it was what exactly I wanted to do at that moment in time. I wouldn't change a damn thing about that. And it wasn't work, just building. It was just building. So, and as long as you're holistically focused on just building things, you're going to have failures. You're going to have successes. You're not doing anything for recognition or clout. And this is something that I think is starting to perpetrate into a lot of startups as well, is have you ever met someone who just starts a startup because they want to say that they've started a startup? Have you ever talked to someone like that?
Many times, yeah. Unfortunately, I think that was kind of like the culture at the Entrepreneurs Club at BU, and just some of the students in general, where that's why I prefaced your sentence by saying it requires a certain personality and the will to put in the hours. But it's not just at BU. A lot of companies and a lot of schools out there, you have a lot of kids who see the romanticized version of what Zuck did or what Jensen did, and they're like, hey, we can build the next NVIDIA, we can build the next Facebook. But the amount of hours that it takes and the amount of grit it takes to get there, it's very hard. And I think it feeds into another thing that we're going to talk about the impact of AI into job market, but a lot of people that are, our age, 22, 23, who just graduated, not just from BU. I know people at UNC Chapel Hill, Michigan, really, really good schools, who are still in the job market. Statistics come out about kids from Ivy League schools who don't have jobs in computer science or adjacent majors. And the reason is that for the last 4 years, mentality that was instilled into kids, maybe from YouTube videos or watching people on LinkedIn, was, hey, I quit my job and took a 6-month boot camp, and now I'm making $200,000 building XYZ websites. But people weren't really passionate about computer science. You heard of engineers at Google that would only work for 2 hours. And, a week, they'd be working 2 side jobs, maybe, if they wanted to, and just keep collecting the money. But those days are over, because now computer science has become one of those fields, really, really intellectually curious, and you're passionate about the field, or you're really good at it. You can not be passionate, but be really good at computer science. Those are the only 2 people who are sort of progressing and doing well in the industry. Everyone else is kind of in a bad spot just because they were told, hey, C's get degrees. You go through 4 years of college and you land a 6-figure job doing back-end engineering or front-end engineering at a company.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. The thing about computer science is, and I know we talked about this privately, but there's no license. There's no, you could maybe argue that for licensed fields, like maybe you get your CPA and then you're kind of guaranteed a job, or you get your law degree, or you get your doctor's license. So, the mechanism of going through school to acquire said license is very important. And yeah, you could pass through. I mean, I have people in my family who did pretty average in college, but then just stuck with education long enough so they got a professional degree, like a professional license, and they're doing very well now. But in computer science, here's the thing. Anyone can open up a computer and start learning data structures and algorithms. Anyone can open up a computer, and I think they even record the Harvard lectures now. Anyone can open up a computer and teach themselves this stuff. Anyone can take the tests. Everything's online for computer science. And unlike other professions, you can practice the skill as well from anywhere, like literally any country, especially now with Starlink, literally anywhere you can.
Replit is a playground where you don't even need a fancy computer or anything. You can
Yeah.
start coding on your phones. You have kids in remote villages in India, Africa, really just coding and building
Yep.
things. And that's why I fell in love with the field. As I mentioned, first thing I said was it's a really democratized field. All you need
Mhm.
is an internet connection and a computer, and now you can do that on an iPhone. So
Mhm.
maybe it's the fault of schools and it's also the fault of students. I do like a two-part, I'm not gonna point fingers, but um, they really need to rechange the model because education as we know it, especially in our field, is changed drastically in the last two or
Yeah.
3 years, where there's a huge disconnect between what school teaches you and the skills you need for industry. And I'm not saying school's not valuable. There's a lot of classes I took, like data structures and algorithms, functional programming, distributed systems, and just every other class I took comes in handy because school teaches you how to learn, but it's
Mhm.
not always going to be the framework for success. Unlike fields you can take like finance or consulting, where it's very linear. Computer science is on an astronomical growth path. So you have to be
Mhm.
willing to adapt and be curious about these things. I mean, also to
Yeah.
your point, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say that, and again, we're only speaking from our experience here at our specific university, but it became increasingly clear to me that in order to, like, okay, this is pretty common across, like, everyone knows this, right? Like, if you want to pass a technical interview, you have to do LEET code. LEET code isn't
Hmm.
taught in schools, LEET code isn't taught in class. Yet, this is if you apply to any computer science job, this is actually your first barrier to entry is you'll get sent an online test. That's not taught in
Hmm.
schools. That's not taught in schools. And I'm not, again, like we still did learn valuable things in school regarding the theory. And I know with our specific degree, computer science is more theory anyways. You learn about the mathematical principles. That stuff's important to learn, absolutely. However, when we're talking specifically in the realm of learning a skill to get a job, the very first barrier to entry, which is the OA, is I mean, maybe we got a little bit of practice. I mean, I didn't take every class at BU, but it was, we learned a little bit out of it in 112 and like with Java, but like to really dive into that, understanding of the application of said mathematical principles and theories, it became pretty clear to me. And I think everyone, who I talked to as a developer kind of understood this as well, is you need to, at the very least, practice, maybe not build your own web app or company or something, but you at the very least need to fire up LEET code and start doing practice problems
Yeah, and I
to
think
have a
it comes
shot
from
at
mentorship.
landing one of these jobs.
It
Mm-hmm.
really comes from like mentorship and having someone who guides you through this process. And I think schools are just playing catch up to industry. I was talking to one of my colleagues, Alex. He's an intern at my lab, and we're working on the same project. So he was taking a reinforcement learning class, and reinforcement learning is having sort of like a revolution. Even though his class is really interesting, they're talking about reinforcement learning with human feedback and proximal policy updates and all these new sort of techniques. I'll put this in air quotes. DeepSeek R1 and OpenAI O3 and all these new reasoning models are using reinforcement learning to reason. So they've come up with reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards. They've come up with reinforcement learning which removes the reward model actually. And there's GRPO, which is proximal policy. And there's so many new techniques that are literally coming out in the form of academic papers and knowledge out of industry every single day that these colleges and classes they cannot play catch up. It's really hard for them to do that. So it really falls down onto the student to understand what's going on in industry. Maybe it's from podcasts, maybe it's from newsletters, but just be intellectually curious. If you're curious about distributed systems and building large scale systems, read about it. Go talk to your professor about it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a huge disconnect. And with any really rising field, you always see things like this happen where it's kind of like a graph where we've reached the peak point of computer science where there's a lot of majors, but not as many jobs or not as many cool jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of competition for the same job. But ultimately, in a few years, it's going to go down. And maybe this is a good segue into talking about AI because I don't think AI
Mm-hmm.
is going to take away software engineering, but I do think it's going to take away software engineers who don't know how to leverage it and who don't know how to think.
I think that's a very fair point. And we've talked about this, but internally at Benmore, something that we're focusing on with all of our developers is specifically utilizing these tools. I don't know if you saw yesterday, Grok 3 just came out. I don't know if you saw that live stream or something like that. I haven't tested it out either. I saw the demo though, and they're creating 3D graphs of, and again, I don't know that demo had been audited. It very well could have been, pre-prepared or something like that. But it seems like with a prompt that's 2 sentences in length, you can essentially generate a 3D graph of that maps launch to Mars and back and shows the orbits. It was ridiculous. And so, and we've talked about this before, but my view is, as of right now, these small code bases, siloed projects, smaller projects, etc. With these AI tools, I don't see the steam stopping realistically, especially on these small projects. You're going to be able to, stand up a server and deploy some sort of basic CRUD small app, like CRUD application, and start getting users in a matter of like hours, where previously it would have taken months. And I really think that that's becoming way more prevalent. I think most people are kind of agreeable that on small siloed projects, like either small projects, small code bases, or smaller services that maybe contribute to a larger code base, the AI tools are absolutely knocking it out of the park. One caveat with that, though, is they keep on releasing statistics. I think there's like a max min, right? So if you're in a small project with like really rapid iteration, like an MVP, you don't have that many users, so you have no users, so you can just push code into production, and your code can be erroneous or doesn't necessarily be the most styled. That's fine. Those AI tools are killing it right now. However, in the large code bases where there's processes, there's versioning processes, there's release schedules, there's dedicated quality assurance departments. They have millions of users, so you can't just push erroneous code or buggy code. That, just due to the context window, it's been rough. It's been rough because the thing about the AI tools is they're very believable. The snippet of code that it gives you, it can give you 50 lines of code, and until you copy and paste it over and implement it and check all the edge cases, it passes like the eye test, essentially. I think they released some report. I think GitHub released some report that since they've implemented AI, there's been more code commits, but also more code that's being rewritten. I think you were mentioning something about that as well, or there's some study about that. I don't know if I was talking to you about that, but at some company they were pushing more code, but it was also extremely erroneous code.
Interesting. I definitely can believe it. What I was talking to you about was that Google said that 25% of the code in the last quarter that's been committed has been generated by AI. So to your point, this thing is here to stay. So I'll give you building off of like the small siloed projects side and from an enterprise side, I'll go into both discussions. From a 30,000 feet view, we've entered the territory of what's known as Jevons paradox, and it's been thrown around in media recently. I remember I wrote about it a few weeks ago on my Substack before it was kind of like a big popular thing. So in technology, whenever technology gets more efficient, this paradox states that people start consuming more. AI is getting to the point where GPT-2 takes 2 hours to train with just $3. Back then, it was a huge project that cost maybe $1 million to train. So you can talk about this new Moore's law. The old Moore's law was that you can fit 2x transistors in every couple years onto an integrated circuit. This new Moore's law is talking about scaling laws, how better these AI models are getting. And first order effect, as Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, mentions, is every year the inference costs keep drastically falling down. So he predicts that the cost of inference to call these APIs is going to fall maybe by 4x, 5x, and in a best case scenario, 10x by the end of this year. So the second order effects going into siloed projects and enterprises is, for siloed projects, if you're building an MVP, it's become so easy for you to leverage these tools to build a product as fast as possible. The barriers to entry to programming and technical know-how is very low. So people can build companies easily now. So if you have a small siloed project, you don't need a team of 5 to 10 devs, and you don't need to raise $200,000, $300,000. I mean, I'm sure you use Stripe for your payroll as well. Stripe's trying to also changed the venture capital industry fundamentally by giving
Yep. We were
companies,
talking about this.
yeah, they give you net terms for $100,000 because
Yep.
they know your deal flow. So combine that with the fact that you can just use an API, or you can just pay $20 for the knowledge of a low-level entry software developer. If you have the basic knowledge to build a project, it's really easy for you to get started, and then you can slowly build a lean team. Now, going into enterprise, Jensen Huang said that the cybersecurity team at NVIDIA, 25% of the code they check in comes from AI. Google, 25% of the code in the last quarter is written by AI. This year, Mark Zuckerberg has publicly said that he is going to be replacing mid and senior level engineers with, surprise, surprise, AI tools. On both sides of the spectrum, depending on your processes, it's a tool that can really supplement a very good developer's output. So, as I previously mentioned, Jensen Huang was the one who I paraphrased, saying that it's not replacing jobs, AI. It's replacing those who don't know how to leverage AI.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the biggest thing and kind of the thing that we're doing at Benmore that's most applicable to that is previously, it's interesting to see software development companies, small siloed projects, or even some of the larger companies that we work with, they were charging astronomical amounts to the order of six-figure contracts for, I don't know, a couple months worth of work to make some integration work and stuff like that. We can undercut the entirety of the market by like 70% because the way we organize our operations is we have one project come in and we assign one developer. And most of our projects, and we like to keep them as small siloed projects, but with the AI assistance, with good communication practices, we can spin these things up for a fraction of you don't need 5 developers anymore. You need 1 developer and access to ChatGPT. And that's been something that, again, it's just been a competitive advantage because we're quick to adopt it. I mean, we had no baseline, but I can imagine, 20, 30 years ago, the only documentation was in binders or books or at the library. Maybe there was some documentation online or something like that. You could need 2 or 3 developers because we take so many things for granted with using AI. Like, I'll give you an example. I remember just 4 years ago when I was starting to get into computer software, how long it took me to run the commands to set up a Django project. I'd have to look through tutorials on YouTube, find blog articles, then download all the packages. Now, if you ask ChatGPT right now, how do I start a Django project? It's going to give you the commands. It's going to give you the libraries. It's going to tell you how to install Homebrew, how to install Python and the package managers and everything like that. It's just right there. That saved, I don't even know, 12, 14, 15 hours of time. So especially on simplistic CRUD apps, smaller siloed projects, it's like a couple keystrokes away. And these prompts don't even, here's the thing as well. Previously, when GP 3.5 first came out, the prompts, you kind of had to put a lot more effort into the prompts. And I know we can talk about meta prompting in just a second. So there's still nuance and stuff in prompting. But across the board, you can typically get, especially with simpler queries, what you need to get, the packages you need to install, the code you need to write with 3 sentences worth of prompts. And I really only do see that getting better over time.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think we've reached this interesting phenomenon where you can leverage these tools, as I said, for, let's say, Benmore, instead of you having to have a huge bureaucracy, for example. I don't really love using the word because, it's been thrown around too much. But you don't need a very well-defined process. You don't need a product manager, and you don't need an HR person. You don't need an accountant for building a CRUD application for a company. All you need is one developer with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, the $20 subscription, and just let the person build those things. So I think just the new model of being very efficient is what the future holds. In my opinion, this probably should be a wake-up call for a lot of large consulting companies, and you can already see that Salesforce said that it's going to be hiring not engineers. It wants to hire people who know how to leverage AI. So Salesforce is already thinking deeper into the future. I don't remember if it was you or not who told me that in China, they don't use infrastructure as a service as a middleware layer. What they do is, so there's no Salesforce over there. What they do is, since the cost of hiring developers is so cheap, For every company, you don't have a sales force. What you do is you build your own CRM, you build your own ERP, and the developers are
Yeah.
so cheap, so you can
Yeah.
just contract them instead of having a custom company, instead of just having a huge company, one size fits all, and then having to call them up and have your engineers tailor it to your use case. You're just hiring those devs to do that. So I think
Yeah.
given
No,
the advent of
absolutely.
AI, you can do the same thing where it's more personalized and it's more finer grained to your processes, which of course feeds into AI agents.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that. There was kind of an age of SaaSization over the past decade, I would say, where there was a whole bunch of SaaS companies that kind of got stood up, and they solved like a specific business problem. Like CRM's a good one, CRM, lead capture, HR, payroll, all these SaaS companies that have been stood up. Now what we're starting to see, and especially with some of the larger companies that we work with, they're just contracting us directly to rebuild these tools specifically for their organization, because you're going to be paying $1,000 a month for some internal HR management tool or some internal, I don't even know, you're going to be paying $1,000 a month for some SaaS CRM or something like that, but you're basically buying maybe half of the features in the suite you're never going to use or touch, right? Why not just contract a smaller development company that can use AI to build something specifically for your use case, stand it up pretty quickly, one and done, right? Like an upfront, that's how we bill, like upfront cost for the development, and then ad hoc or ongoing support, which is going to be like as needed support. So it's going to be way cheaper. And then you just price it out. You just tee it out. It's like, over the course of 20 years, if you use this SaaS software that you don't own, you have no control over, they're going to push updates, they're going to push features that you have no control over. Why not just build something internally for 1/10 of the cost that's going to be specifically tailored to your business use cases? That's something that we're starting to see across the board. I don't think we've talked about this before. That's a very interesting observation from the sales force. I think that that's going to continue to perpetrate into the U.S. environment, because it just makes sense. Like it's just a math equation. It's like, yeah, I don't own the IP and I'm paying $1,000, a month for some tool that I don't need half of the features on, or I can just build something for 1/10 of the cost internally and own the code and own the processes and the development behind it. Now, that's like the way that we think as developers. However, I've heard some pushback against that from some of our stakeholders that we talk to. A big thing comes down to trust, for sure, as well. Like a big thing comes down to, I'm not a tech person. Like I don't trust this stuff. I'd rather just buy from a reputable vendor and have them trust all that stuff. But I think over the next couple of years, as more and more business individuals do kind of venture into owning their software and owning their IP, and they kind of start treating it just as if they were owning I think it's pretty applicable, especially if it's a simple application. It's pretty applicable to like any other maybe complex piece of machinery that you would own. Like if you were a logistics company and you owned a whole bunch of trucks, like, yeah, you still have to maintain the trucks. You have to contract people to maintain the trucks. You have to, check them in and have process control surrounding the trucks. And I think once people stop looking at technology as some like foreign, crazy, tech, like super smart, only reserved for super smart kind of people, and they start looking at like, people look at trucks as assets and stuff like that. That's something that I'm very excited about at Benmore, and we're really excited about over the next 5 to 10 years, is to be that, the person that assembles basically the custom machinery, be someone who assembles that. And that's something that we do at Ben. And I've talked to you about this as well. We don't do SaaS. Every single line of code that we write, it's our clients. They are free to leave us. They are free to do whatever they want with the software. We just had an acquisition where one of the logistics companies that we built their platform, they just got bought, and the code that we wrote was able to be included in the acquisition. So, it would be like if you bought a truck from a manufacturer, like, and you sell your trucking company off. It's not like you're leasing the trucks. Like those are part of your company. You can sell off the equipment and the assets. Yeah. So I think once people start realizing the multiples on having good like internal software and understanding that these, in my opinion, should be viewed as assets, that's the biggest thing I need to I'm trying to make very clear, is that code and code bases, these are assets. they're not physical, but they are assets. They can be resold. They do have valuations. They can provide value. That I'm very excited to see, and something that we dive into mainly with Benmore over the next couple years. But to that point, yeah, like you said, I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but I'm still so awestruck that like you mentioned over there in China that they don't have a sales force because they're so efficient with the code that they can just do it internally for most companies. That's crazy.
Yeah, because the cost of devs is so cheap, and now you just have your own little entry level developer for 14 cents per token or something. So it's
crazy.
You can do the same thing. But yeah, I think I completely agree with you when you say that code is an asset, and which is why people should be bullish on Benmore Technologies and companies in this domain, because you are being very, very efficient and you're creating value for the customer, where the old model that your code belonged to someone else and your IP was not your own is rapidly changing, because, everybody can code the same thing up. You don't need to have some custom vendor who's upselling you 15 other packages when you just have one company that can, you can contract and build a lean product for you. And I think that's the future of AI. To go into that more deeply, do you want to go more into like AI
I was
trends
going to
then?
ask you a little bit about. I wanted to touch a little bit about your specific research and
Sure.
the model that you're building at your lab.
Of course. So yeah, as Richard mentioned, I work as a computer vision researcher at Harvard. So we're a computational biology lab, and we own our own DGX's A100, so we have our own compute. And essentially what we do is we're building self-supervised models. So self-supervised just means that there is no human labeling or annotating the data. Let's imagine that our entire solar system is the human body, and the Earth is a huge cell in the human body. In the cell, or let's say maybe it's an organ. Within the Earth, you have a football stadium, that's your cell. So what we're trying to do is imagine a blade of grass that exists in the football stadium. So solar system, Earth, football stadium, blade of grass. These things are really, really tiny. It's only 1,000 times bigger than an atom. What we're trying to do is we collect cellular data. These are organelles within the cell, and they're collected from highly sophisticated microscopes using electron microscopy techniques. So it's noisy clustered data, which shows cells interacting with viruses. And what we want to do is we want to, first of all, segment. So identify the cells from the background, from the viruses separately. So first step is segment these cells in 4 dimensions, which includes the volume. So that's 3 dimensions plus time. That's 4 dimensions. Our first point is to segment those cells. And the second is to track them. Because if you can understand how a virus is interacting inside a cell with these things known as organelles, so, you're trying to understand how these viruses are moving around in the cell, and you can track them across time, you can come up with methods to prevent these viruses from interacting with the cell and basically inhibit their drastic reactions to the human body, which ultimately can help you solve a lot of virus-borne diseases. So I'm not a biologist. What I do is build these models. And as I mentioned, they're all self-supervised. So when I say self-supervised, it just means that you're not labeling these cells in clusters, because literally labeling one of these cells would take us maybe 4 hours. That's just one frame, Richard. We have 100 frames for one movie, and then we have 300 movies. So you can imagine years of human hours that go into labeling these data sets that someone would use to build a model. So, the existing literature only has self-supervised models for nuclei, which just means you have a self-supervised model to label a football stadium. And half of them also use label data because it's really easy to draw boundaries around nuclei. What we're trying to do, no one in the world has done, except for another lab that we're competing with, which is run by Eric Betsick, a Nobel Prize winner from 2014. So we're building a 4-dimensional self-supervised model to segment and track what are known as endosomes, these organelles within a cell, and how viruses are interacting with them.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, but it's one of those like interesting forefronts of technology. And I didn't know about the data labeling aspect, because you can imagine, right? And this is happening. you can imagine, let's say you needed to build some sort of model to identify, I don't even know, closets, for example, or something like that, right? That doesn't take 4 hours for one frame. That takes a split second. So you could actually have, people go in there and just have a million images of closets, and then, like you can actually get through that. But in your specific domain, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not really feasible, because I'm assuming you need expertise in the actual field to understand what the cell even looks like. And then on top of that, it's just way more time consuming. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the problems don't just exist because some people might just apply like a thresholding to remove the background and, do some connected components labeling and say, okay, I have identified individual cells and maybe I can track them. The problem is these intensities are variable because, as I mentioned, this is very, very tiny and sophisticated data. So you're using microscopes that cost millions of dollars, and you're coming up with really, really interesting techniques. We take our data at an angle of 45 degrees, and we slice it, and we reconstruct it dynamically so that you can actually see the cell. The intensities of the images, the light is variable across frames. The shapes of these cells, they're not all uniform. It's a dynamic system. They're all clustered together. So even if you were able to label them roughly, you cannot track them because these are such dynamic, low intensity systems that you can't just apply classical computer vision techniques like building a box or using some sort of counting numbers. You really need a very sophisticated algorithm to actually identify these variable intensities. And that's where a large part of the problem we're trying to solve comes into play. And it took us a couple months to actually get around that issue, which yesterday we presented where I don't want to give too much away, but I think we've made a lot of good headways. Maybe in a month and a half or two, you see some interesting research that we publish regarding this.
Well, speaking of that, you also do have a Substack that you write about all of these things. So I'll make sure to link that below. But yeah, I'm excited to see. I mean, and congratulations on the initial success. It's going to be very interesting to see in the coming month and a half, because I mean, that sounds pretty cool to me. I mean, like pretty much from what I understand, again, you know me, I'm not too much into the weeds with the technology. My expertise starts and stops at like a little bit above CRUD apps. I need a lot smarter people.
You're giving yourself too little credit. You're giving yourself too little credit. Come on.
But I do need typically a lot smarter. But it's like the scene. Have you ever seen that movie, Margin Call?
I have not. I have not.
Oh, it hasn't. It was funny. They have like a running motif in the movie where they're uncovering the 2008 mortgage crisis, and it starts with like a really sophisticated PhD mathematician combing through the data and like seeing the trends, and it just follows about how that message goes all the way up to C-suite, like the CEO, to make a decision on what to do. And every single new boss that comes in, they say the same thing. It's like, explain it to me like I'm 5. And it just keeps on. So it starts with like, explain it to me like I'm a 20-year-old. And then the next one is like, explain it to me like I'm a teenager. It's like, explain it to me like I'm a toddler or something like that. And then the top is just like, so we're in trouble. So we're in trouble. Is that what I'm hearing? So to a lesser extent, sometimes with some of these complex, sometimes I've definitely hit a couple. Imagine I was not a computer scientist. How would you explain this? Remember I asked you last time, I was like, can you make an analogy for me? But again, to my limited understanding, right, it's just very interesting to me because my rudimentary understanding of this is like, you can make some pretty sophisticated models nowadays with like, if you were to take a picture of like, let's just say like all the farms in the US, for example, and you wanted to isolate and identify, you want to make an AI that could identify the barns in a picture of a farm, right? Well, you could take 1 million, 2 million, 5 million pictures, and then you label the half of the data and basically just mark a square or something around the barn. And then over time, you can test on the unlabeled data and refine from there. But that methodology is not feasible in your situation. So you have to make completely like a model that's trying to do that by itself. It's trying to do the labeling by itself. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And it takes really complicated mathematics and model knowledge. We've contributed a lot to the literature. We haven't published anything yet, but we've built some really interesting ideas combining open source computer vision projects that are built for identifying cats from dogs. And we've really, really, really made it fine grained to identify one cell organelle from another cell organelle. So
That's incredible. That's incredible. That's the great thing about technology as well is, a lot of really successful people, all that they do is they take, like, I think ChatGPT is a good example, right? They take something that like has been heavily researched, is very mathematical, and they just say, yeah, I'm going to apply this to ball bearing manufacturing industry. Like, I'm going to take this technology and just apply it to like some random niche industry. And that seems to be like a very common thing that happens with technology, I would say. So there's definitely
it's
power.
the best thing about open sourcing. I think open
Yeah.
sourcing is such a good thing because, and a lot of credit goes to Meta because we've used a lot of open source code from Meta. When you open source all this knowledge and all these interesting innovations, you have some very smart people who are taking those innovations and building on top of them. I mean, that's how Meta became Meta. They've developed React, they've developed PyTorch, and it's huge open source communities that are building on top of each other, which also helps Meta build its brand name. And I think, that also feeds into DeepSeek R1, for example. It's an open weights model, which is slightly different from open source, but you still have a lot of the code available. You still have the weights to download, and you can run it locally. You can just use Oyama and just, spin off a DeepSeek R1 instance for your own computer. You can do that with ChatGPT. You can do that with Gemini Flash Thinking now. So overall, I think with more open source AI, you're going to see better and better models, better and better applications. And goes back to my initial point that second order effect of open sourcing AI and making it so cheap is you're reducing the barriers to entry for innovation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's something that it will have to continue to be one of the most important things I think about just the technology industry as a whole. I love the fact that, not too long ago, now that it's starting to get a little bit more solidified, but yeah, not too long ago, it was pretty much, if you wanted to get a job as a software developer, it was pretty much completely skill-based. Like, now they're starting to say you need a degree, and I can understand some arguments for that, but for the longest time, it was just, you had people working for the government with no degree, and they were just really good developers, and that's what it is. So it would be interesting to see, I think across the board, artificial intelligence, specifically the LLM side of things, the code generation side of things, is going to do nothing but lower that barrier to entry. Internet's only going to get better across the world. Adoption of good coding practices and resources out there on the web are only going to become more available, and they're going to become integrated into, AI's, like, the training set or the data that, these large language models are trained on. So, I mean, I'm very excited. I continue to hope that it will be a very, what do you call it? Democrative or democratic, like very democratized industry. I think that's been huge. I mean, it's one of the industries that provides a lot of upwards mobility. It really does. It's one of the industries where you can be a teenager in your 20s and just hack some project together, catch a viral video on TikTok, and suddenly you're making, a ton of money, and you're in a whole new world. There's not that many industries where you can do that.
And I think the promise got a little saturated where everyone was like, hey, I can do that, but you of course need skill. You can't just pursue your passions. You need to be skilled with having a passion for these things. And, that's how people become great developers. But yeah, I mean, the future is that's going to happen. We've reached, so OpenAI has 5 levels of automation that they've defined. It's a pyramid. The first level was chatbots, which was just you asking questions to ChatGPT, and people thought it was better Google. Of course, it was hallucinating a few times, and it was just giving you what it had learned from its training data. November 2024, Ilya Sutskever, who is the head of research at OpenAI, went on NeurIPS, which is a huge conference for AI and technology, and said that pre-training is dead, which just means that we've trained on the entire internet. Now, what do? So we theoretically reached the second point of OpenAI's said automation, which was reasoning, what you see with these new O1 Pro models, DeepSeek R1 model. Essentially, what they do is it's a combination of what's known as test time compute. So from a 30,000 feet view, there's 3 things when it comes to machine learning models. There's training, which is you train on a huge corpus of data. There's inference, where you ask it questions and it responds back to you. But then there's this niche field that's starting to grow. We used to call it post-training, but I think it's just going to be called training now. It's called test and compute, where when you ask it questions, it's not just basically spitting out what it knows, it's thinking. It comes from this idea of chain of thought, where these models are reasoning. So they think and they go back into their training data, and they might even modify the weights of their initial training data. So it uses this idea of trial and error. That's how these models get so good. DeepSeek V3 was the base model, which was trained on Qwen, which is a very good Chinese open source alternative to ChatGPT. It used ChatGPT. There's claims about distillation, which uses tokens from these large models, these student teacher models, where you have a teacher that knows everything and you have a student and you just learn from the teacher. So these smaller and smaller models keep getting better and better and better because they're learning from highly specialized knowledge. But once you have this base model, what you do is you have verifiable questions. So you have questions in coding, you have questions in math, natural language, and you tell the model, hey, test them out. You have this reward matrix. So if it gets the answer correct, you give it a reward. If it gets it wrong, you subtract some points. And that's how these models get really, really good at reasoning. So we theoretically reached the second point in this pyramid. Now, the third point is AI agents, which, to your point, meant democratized, no IP, code is your asset. You're building a block of code that can't just, spit out things it knows, but it also has the ability to reason. So I'll give you an example. I use Built. It's a card by Wells Fargo that lets you pay rent without having to pay some sort of credit card fees. So it's a credit card for paying rent. They use Decagon AI. What Decagon did was they built an AI agent as a chatbot. So every time I ask Built a question about, let's say my credit score, when my payment is due, it's an AI agent. I'm not talking to a customer representative. That AI agent knows the entire workflow of Built's payment systems. So how, you can process these payments, how, what kind of questions users have asked, the FAQ, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you can go about answering questions without the need for a customer representative. So I think AI agents will be the future, where you have these large blocks of code for your own website that can think for themselves, and they can manage HR, they can manage payroll, and they can communicate with you. Then you have the fourth layer, which is organizational AI, which means that that single block of code is interacting with other blocks of code and removing the need for multiple departments within your company. And finally, institutional AI, which is replacing an entire organization. And it's thinking about HR. It's doing the functions for HR, communicating and spinning off other AI agents to do the task. So that's the next 5 to 10 years of AI innovation. We've reached the second point. We're rapidly getting to the third point. And then, ultimately we're going to race towards AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, where it can think for itself like a human.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, I think I talked to you about this before, but the fact that, in fact, let me see if I can find this article. I think it was Wall Street Journal, VCs buying. All right, here we go. Wall Street Journal, now wanted in Silicon Valley, ho-hum businesses with thin profit margins. Gosh, they pay well all of these. Okay, but venture capital firms are bringing AI and deal making to accounting, property management, and other unglamorous fields. Now, I'm not a betting man, but based off that headline, it sounds like they're going to try and buy up a whole bunch of very service-heavy businesses with thin margins, replace, automate where they can. And, if you run an HOA company and, you're bringing in, $4 million for local community, just based off the HOA fees, and you're just processing, I don't know how an HOA firm works, but my interaction with HOA myself is essentially you'll get claims and you have to pay your dues. So if you violate HOA services, someone will put in a request or a formal complaint against you, and then they'll levy a fine. Now, you can imagine an AI doing that if it's tuned. You can imagine an AI understanding a claim, auditing against the current privacy rules, and maybe you need one person to actually kind of verify the data and basically formally approve it. Maybe you need one person, but like the legwork of looking through the current I don't know, rules of the HOA and taking a look at the evidence submitted on a complaint against a property owner. You could reckon to say that an AI could be doing 75% of that. Accounting is interesting to me. Clearly, these VCs think that there's a role to play there, but I know we talked about that. I mean, I think we're rapidly moving towards, the service business. This is what I was talking about. These service businesses of mundane paperwork, mundane tasks, with the rapid development of the agents. Again, I don't want to make any predictions here, but it seems to be like VCs making a bet on the replacement of these mundane tasks. Now, what does that mean? I mean, there's a book called Bullshit Jobs or something like that. I don't know if I've talked to you about that.
You've not, but that sounds like a funny title.
There's a book called Bullshit Jobs where they just talk about like many jobs in the American economy are very monotonous, mundane, and very clerical. I could see there being a large disruption, especially, you got to think if they're doing property management firms through AI, what does that mean for the US as a whole? What does that mean for the people who are going to potentially be replaced by that? What does it mean for, what does that mean? And again, we've talked about this, but it could be analogous to like the Industrial Revolution where it's like, okay, maybe you're not doing clerical work, all the time anymore, processing sort of complaints, auditing against your, like in the specific, and again, I've never worked in an HOA management firm. I don't know. This could be completely wrong. But yeah, let's just say some mundane tasks and clerical work. Maybe you can free your time up where you can process 100 of those claims at a time or something like that and kind of automate and do 100 of those claims at a time. A close family member of mine runs a technical services business as well. And he was talking about that a lot of these technical services companies now are also trying to automate things like feature enhancements. And just make it like through a portal. Like let's say you have your existing app and instead of you having to meet with a product owner or product manager or developer and kind of explain what feature enhancement you want, instead that's textually submitted into a form and that sort of is processed, deconstructed, and then implemented into a linear ticket for the developer to then go and implement. So I think a lot of these sort of communication, I hesitate to use the word mundane, but like these clerical sort of tasks, I think that will be the first layer. And I know you were talking about it earlier, like towards organizational AI. Now, when does it get to a point where it can understand the context, create a linear ticket, pass that to another agent that can then go into the code base and then actually implement that enhancement? I think that would be more towards like organizational AI. I don't know. I don't know if it will get there. I don't know if it will be implemented to that level, but it's certainly a possibility. It's just very interesting to see that from this article from the Wall Street Journal that it looks like VC's making a bet on it, which is very, very interesting to me. So
I think, there's three buckets. There's techno-pessimists who are worried that AI is going to take away their jobs. There's techno-optimists who think it's going to be like the best thing for humanity. And I think I put myself in this bucket called techno-realists on how real the impacts are. In my opinion, there's a lot of places, even in the United States, where people don't even have stable internet connections and, they don't know how to use a computer very well. The analogy of the Industrial Revolution is pretty apt where, sure, we live in cities where everyone's doing some technical job and it requires some sort of expertise, but when you replace certain jobs, you're also creating new jobs in the economy. You need someone with accounting expertise to verify the results of these AI models. All in all, even if
and to prompt them and potentially to prompt them as well.
Yeah. And if you don't know how to, and if you think, all right, these models are pretty good, they're not hallucinating, you still need a human in the loop to somehow leverage this tool. It will also free up a lot of people to do creative things. You can now write poetry, you can write songs, you can do anything you're passionate about that was previously not possible because you had to get a stable job. Another thing is, I'll bring up the example of Waymo. Waymo is a self-driving car that's been deployed in regions of San Francisco, and it's been taking away large shares from Lyft and Uber. People say, all right, what's going to happen to all these Uber drivers? They can get better jobs in manufacturing. There's a huge boom in building robots and automating those things. They can get better, higher paying jobs, higher skill jobs. These same workers, they can get training for 2 to 3 months on how to leverage AI or how to build these tools. And it's not like if their job gets replaced, people who are feeding horses and, who are training these horses, it's not like they just disappeared. They just learned a new skill set. So there might be temporary pain for existing people to adapt. But once that transition phase is over, that's been human history for centuries. You have a new innovation. It will free up people and develop and help them develop a new skill set to leverage their new tools to better efficiency, better humanity. So I think I'm not very pessimistic on AI taking jobs. I'm also being pragmatic that there's also a certain level on how much automation you can have. Clearly, there is an opportunity to make a lot of these firms efficient. And I think, VCs are jumping onto a very cool phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, still though, I do tend to empathize. I mean, we can just take this from personal experience. You imagine if we started computer science like 2 years later and we were kind of sold a dream. And I remember going on TikTok and I remember specific people legitimately saying, no, I didn't do anything extra. I just like got a good internship and then like I just kind of coasted through school and then I made $700,000-$800,000 a year. And this was like these videos went viral. People were talking about it. I remember reading through Reddit threads, people talking about it. And it's like, yeah, I can feel that. I can feel the pain there. Like I really do empathize with that. Absolutely, holistically, it's kind of a shame in that sense. I can empathize with the pain. However, especially in a realm like technology, I think you need to go into it with the mindset that even if you did get your degree in computer science, and even if AI just never existed, at this moment in time, there'd be some new tech stack that just came out. There'd be some new language that came out. There'd be some new adoption in the industry. There'd be something else. If you've worked in the industry, unless you're at like a very kind of established company that doesn't really change their practices and you've been there for a long time, if you want to do anything along the lines of job hopping or, any sort of personal project or startup space, computer science as a whole is a continual game of picking up the new technologies that are out and applying them and absorbing them and utilizing them in your day-by-day work. Now, I can't speak to other industries. I don't know how much disruption there's been in the HOA management industry. And I don't know if that's a standard or kind of an assumption like a lot of software developers know, is that you have to stay up to date with the times. So in that sense, if there's an industry where AI just comes in and replaces a whole bunch of people, yeah, I can really empathize with that. I mean, there's no sort of indication that you would have had to adapt or anything like that, and you've been at a stable job, especially I can feel for the people who have been at a stable job in just think about that article, accounting. I mean, accounting's been around for, I don't even know how long since business has been around. So you can imagine, I doubt that, and again, I could be completely wrong. I'm not an accountant. I've never worked in the industry. I have no idea. Maybe there's been like an injection of better software tools like Excel and stuff like that. But if these VCs are really aiming towards holistic replacement, okay, I could understand and empathize with the dispassion there and maybe a sense of helplessness. However, like you said, if people are really resilient in general, they'll adapt. And, if you go through a high-skilled profession like accounting, mathematics, Excel probably, I'm assuming, and you can probably quickly adapt into an adjacent field or something that leverages AI, or maybe just kind of modify your skill set to be the person who's prompting accounting firms. But I've just never seen an article like that. I've just never seen an article where VCs are eyeing down established clerical businesses and buying them out. Typically, VCs have been going after, like groundbreaking
exponential returns. Yeah.
Which makes it think like these clerical businesses, service-based businesses now are starting to enter into the forefront of these exponential return businesses. Because I can imagine from their perspective, imagine if you had an accounting firm that was doing $50 million in revenue and $45 million of dollars of that is overhead, and whatnot. And you had some assumption that you could replace 50% of operations with automation. You've just made yourself $35 million essentially, or $20 million in 1 year. So I can get it from that perspective. I also am willing to understand potentially the dispassion and empathize with the sort of fear that may be coming along with this.
Yeah, no, I see your point, and it's hard for me to speculate how the future is going to look. At the moment, it hasn't started to displace large number of jobs, so we're not in the speculative territory yet where this has become a formal bubble. I do preface this by saying that accounting has been along, for example, let's say a very clerical field for as long as business has existed. But when the internet came along, it went from completely paper-based to you mailing your HOA or your term sheet to another department in your office or to an accounting firm, and then someone taking days to get back. And it was a very manual process.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened with Excel was, all right, now you can just do it in front of you instead of, spending time writing on a paper. You don't have to print out another piece of paper, if you cross something out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, after that, you don't have to physically send this document printed out to your accounting firm. You can just email them. Now, with the advent of QuickBooks, the accountants could just, you don't even have to have a different accounting firm. You can just have an internal accounting firm where you take documents from your same departments. Everybody is signing using DocuSign and sending you their term sheets and, balances, etc. And you're solving another problem. So it's a gradual process over the last 20 years where people really haven't lost those jobs. They just adapted. I think the only difference between the Web 2.0 SaaS boom and AI is that it's rapidly developing, and part of it's also narrative from companies needing to upsell and leverage those chatbots using inference to generate revenues. But I think it's the same analogy where, as QuickBooks and Excel and email replaced you physically having to print a paper, write them down, talk to people, and then mail someone your account, you can just do that online. So I see the same view forward for technology, and that's where techno-realism, being pragmatic, comes into play. And once again, I do sympathize with the students. I think it's usually the first ones who are facing the firing squad are computer science students. So you sympathize. And at the same time, I think the best way forward is to mentor, where I've taken a couple people under my wing and I mentor them and try and help them understand what the processes and, what the outlook is forward. Because both you and I don't know what's going to happen, but we're just trying our best to navigate those headwinds. So
absolutely.
I think there's a lot of reason to be positive rather than, but also
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you could predict it, I wouldn't be doing a service-based business. I'd be trading stocks right now, but I can't. So, okay. I mean, I think those are great points. I mean, I think that's a good place to end it, honestly. It's going to be interesting over the next couple of years. As someone who's directly contributing to the field, I'm excited to, follow along with your research. How cool would it be to be able to track and contribute to virus mitigation efficiency? It'd be awesome, a footnote on what I'm sure will be a very, very impressive resume. So,
appreciate it. Thank you so much. Too kind.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place to end it, unless you have anything else that you would like to say in regards to the AI stuff.
I just think, I will just end by saying that there's a lot of noise around all these innovations, and it's hard for people to parse through the noise. However, there is a lot of reason to be very optimistic on how to use these tools, because I use Free Tax USA to file my taxes, for example. And, I have a lot of hints from stocks I invest in and, different services I use, high yield savings accounts, etc. So I was just using ChatGPT to summarize some of my yearly stock gains from my 1099 dividend form, and I use it to fill out my tax form. But hey, I'm getting accepted by the Fed. I'm getting my return soon. So it's just an example of, instead of me having to spend 2-3 hours, literally like using a calculator to add these things up, and I'm using a software tool to file these taxes. Filing taxes would take me like 7 to 8 hours. Now I did it within a matter of 1 hour. So I think that analogy translates to accounting, that analogy translates to HR, and basically our entire economy is shifting to a value-based economy. With these efficiency gains, just looking at the capital markets and looking at how much more money you can generate, the GDP is going to go through the roof. So ultimately, it's going to lead to more prosperity for everyone else. And this is more of an abstract concept, but in the last 50 years, all innovations around us, this computer, the software that you and I are using to record this podcast. In the last 50 years, semiconductors and technology have lifted billions out of poverty. So we can use the same analogy, and it's going to create a lot of value indirectly. Our lives are so much better now than they were 50 years ago. So yeah, I just want to leave people with that note that it's going to directly and indirectly have a positive impact on what you can do as a human being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Again, I have no portion in the game here, but I'll, try to navigate the realms, just try to stay interested. I think that's the best way to put it, is you just stay curious about these technologies and stay up to date with them. There's going to be, like you mentioned, those three buckets. You're a pessimist, optimist, realist. It's like any other tide of the turn. And what I'm excited about, this seems to be like the first big one in our lifetime, for sure. I don't think I've experienced anything like this except for maybe social media, but we were still pretty young when that was really taking over. But this seems to be like the first one that we're able to really grasp and encounter and kind of feel out as adults and, working professionals. It'd be interesting to see, and it'd be interesting to see in 20 years when we're talking about, I don't even know, Mars-based AGI economics and mining, talking about the forefront of that. It would be interesting to study these cycles, because that's what everyone says, right? That's older than us, is like these things, it happened with the internet, it happened with the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not trying to say that this is like those. It may be, it may not be, but it's definitely a movement. So I'm excited to experience and learn and kind of, experience this, what you could call, I would say, the first feeling of sort of a real value-based revolution. There's genuine value from these tools as well. It's not some abstract, thing that isn't driving value. I think most people who have used these tools have been able to derive some sort of value from them. So it's going to be interesting to navigate over the next couple of years, maybe decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always happy to come back and chat with you in a couple months to see what's new in the industry. So yeah, this is
Infamous
a great place
AI realist comes back to drop another truth bomb.
Yes.
But yeah, no. Well, anyways, man, I'll see you around. It's great catching up, and I'm sure we'll do another one of these coming up soon in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. All right. Talk to you later,
All right,
Richard.
see you around.
Bye.
Bye.